This briefing was organized in response to Congressional Office's interest in this topic, and specifically, we partnered with the Congressional Victims' Rights Caucus to coordinate this event. I want to mention our other key collaborators before we move into the content of the program. They include Pennsylvania State University's Center for Healthy Children and the Global Alliance for Behavioral Health and Social Justice. Our primary sponsors for this afternoon's briefing are the Society for the Psychological Study of Social Issues and the National Prevention Science Coalition. I want to quickly mention that we're going to have an evaluation forum. All of the folks that were involved in putting this together are very much interested in your feedback as we move forward on these issues after today. So I encourage you to pick one of those up and fill it out at the end of our briefing or when you leave. So, as Representative Poe mentioned, addressing the problem of human trafficking is challenging. It's not impossible, but it's challenging because it encompasses a range of circumstances, it often overlaps with related crimes, and it can be difficult to measure. We have to consider how factors at the individual, interpersonal, institutional, community, and societal levels all contribute to human trafficking, and all could potentially be targeted for intervention. So there is a need for a multi-tiered strategy that better assesses risk and protection, provides an array of services to meet the unique needs of victims and survivors, and reduces the vulnerability of children and youth to trafficking. While we have made progress, researchers and others have noted that the current responses that we have often address the symptoms and not the underlying structural and systemic causes of human trafficking. Many of the programs in the U.S., which are incredibly important, focused on the response, as the representative was saying, to victims and survivors of human trafficking. By contrast, preventive approaches, when they are present, can in part focus on strengthening vulnerable and at-risk children, increasing their resilience to becoming victims. As noted by the U.S. Department of State and others, the fundamental framework used by the U.S. and others includes what's called the 4 Ps: prevention, protection, prosecution and partnership, and program evaluation. Today, in this briefing, we're going to focus on the lessons learned from the growing research base on the first of those 4 Ps, prevention. We know that the limited evidence base could and should be strengthened through rigorous evaluation of promising prevention and intervention practices that we're going to be discussing today. So it's my pleasure now to turn and to introduce Audrey Morrissey. Ms. Morrissey is the Associate Director of My Life, My Choice. She's helped develop and lead survivor-led programs that aim to prevent the exploitation or re-victimization of vulnerable girls aged 12 to 18, reaching more than 200 girls annually. Her expertise has also informed My Life, My Choice's nationally recognized exploitation prevention curriculum, which she co-authored and is currently used in 27 states. Today, she's going to be talking with us about how a survivor's testimony on prevention could have helped.
Good afternoon. Can people hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm listening to all the wonderful researchers, and I'm saying, oh God, they're talking about me, and all the different things that I had gone through as a young person. So I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about like the recruitment and impact. We heard about addiction and how I got out of the life and early recovery. So we heard a lot about family. And so for me, I really come from a middle class black family. My family, we were not on welfare. We lived in a big, beautiful 3-family home. My parents worked in those days because I was thinking about that earlier. I'm like, God, you're really getting up there, but because I come from an era you didn't need, people could be successful without, they weren't an educated family. But in those days, you could, go to work, do the right thing, support your families. So I don't feel that I came from a family where we didn't struggle financially. I will say that my mother is probably one of the most hardcore people. My mother comes from a Southern black background. I come from a background of children are to be seen and not heard. When I look back on, from where my mother came from and her parents came from, and they were from the South, and they basically, in a sense, still really carried a real severe slavery mentality, right? And so that's what they incorporated into raising their children. Just want you to kind of take a look at this picture. This was me at age 16 years old. One of the things that would have, I think, could have prevented recruitment, for me it started with there was no education around teen pregnancy. Right? Again, I come from a family, children are to be seen and not heard, and things were not talked about in the house. And I do understand we've come a long way since then, and we are educating our children, but this is where I come from, and I'm just really talking about what played out in my life for me to end up being recruited. And so as you can see, I was just a little 16-year-old girl with a child. Didn't know anything about being a mother. I will say that my mother did tell me when she found out that I was pregnant that it was not a good idea and that I was too young to be a mother, and she did suggest that I resort to other alternatives. But of course, I thought I was in love, and this is my baby's father. And one of the things that I want to say, because I want to go in and out about the prevention piece, one of the things that I think could have prevented me from being recruited in, because we always educate, most families will educate their children about staying away from strangers. So I kind of got that concept, right? You don't walk up to strange cars, make a big scene if somebody approaches you that you don't know. But the reality is that my pimp was not a stranger. My pimp was a year older than me. We talked about school. He went to school with me. And he was an athlete, very nice looking, and, no one told me like the language and what pimps would do and things that they would say to recruit you. So I think for me, what could have prevented me from being recruited in by someone I knew is that if I had been educated around tactics that pimps use versus the stay away from stranger concept. And so I also come from a place, being a woman of a certain age, where, now children are being sold online. I come from an area, anyone familiar with the Boston area, a place called the Combat Zone. We were visible. And I also come from a place where Johns never got arrested. We were always arrested. We were the bad guys. And another thing that I heard the doctors talking about is community, right? And I always thought the people in my community that, the drug dealers, the pimps that made money, I thought like, that's what I saw, right? So I thought like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. The thing that, for me, that I was up against in my community, also being, coming from a Roxbury, Dorchester area, one of the things that racism, even in my community, meaning I was a light-skinned girl, the kids call me things like white girl, pus color, is your father white, are you Puerto Rican, where'd you get that white girl hair from? I was bullied constantly. And so one of the things that kept me stuck in this environment, I thought that I had found a world of which I had finally fit in. I also come from the era of busing. I come from the era of where they first started busing black children to white schools. I had bricks thrown at my school bus. They called me the N-word. And so I was that young person who was really confused. And what I mean about that, I felt that when I was in the hood, I was too light to be black, and when I went to school, I was too dark to be white. And so when I ended up in the combat zone, when I was brought to the combat zone, I thought that it was a world in which I had fit in. Why? The combat zone in those days was real racist. The white girls made all of the money, But because I was light-skinned, Johns would say things to me like, is there any white girls around? If he couldn't find a white girl, he'd take me. If he wanted a black girl, but he thought the brown-skinned black girl might rob him, he would take me, right? And so girls that were, other girls who were in the combat zone alongside me, the darker-skinned girls, they began to befriend me, right? Oh, see if he'll take two, right? And I have to be honest with you, I did make a lot of money, but the problem is I didn't keep it. The money went in one hand and out the other, right? But that, because I know a lot of people wonder, how do people get trapped in this life? I know for me, I had developed this false sense of self-esteem, false sense of self-worth, but it was the only place where, if you look like me, it was okay to be there. And so I became trapped in this vicious cycle and this pimp who was taking my money. He eventually went to jail. And one of the things that I learned to do over the years of being in the combat zone, I was brought in at age 16. I didn't get out until I was 30. I thought I had found what I was looking for in substances. I found that when I used drugs, I was a better stripper, right? Because I got a real bright idea, right? Because I already felt like I didn't belong anywhere but in the combat zone, right? So even after the pimp was gone, I was still there. But then I got a bright idea, and I said, I'll do something. I think I'll become a stripper. This way, I'll be inside the clubs, and I'm at less risk for recruitment. I wish I could say, right, that's the end of the story. And then by age 20, which to me at my age now, 20 is still a child, when a man comes in at age 38, 39, and I'm 20 years old, and he said something to me, again, someone who I'd known from my community. He was much older than me. I remember seeing him on my way to school. I remember he was a sharp dresser, he looked good, and everyone always talked about how he was the best dresser in Boston. And when he approached me, again, he wasn't a stranger, right? And so then the vicious cycle began again. And at that time, I hadn't been introduced to heroin yet. He introduced me to heroin. And from there, it was years of I was off and running. And again, in those days, no prevention. The only thing that, there was a van that would ride around the combat zone. And that particular van was riding around because I was also in the life during the AIDS epidemic, right? In the 80s. And I remember a van would ride around and they were passing out condoms. But they weren't passing out condoms for us. What they were doing was they were passing out condoms for the upper middle class Johns who were coming into the combat zone, and it was to prevent them from catching HIV from the prostitutes. And so that was the only level of, right, and the prevention wasn't set up to save my life. The prevention was set up so that, you prostitutes won't infect these poor Johns who are buying children and take the virus home to their wives. One of the other things I want to talk about, because substance abuse came up, isn't she cute? She's awfully cute. And, but due to substance abuse and the second pimp that I was with, I got pregnant by him. This cute little baby was born addicted to heroin, methadone. And, I want to talk about, and you mentioned Brigham and Women's, which is my hospital, which I love. And, but of course, when I was in the life, I remember someone said, if you're pregnant, you can get on this methadone clinic. And I remember it's called Boston Medical now, but in my day it was Boston City Hospital. And I remember having this child. I remember her, they said she was addicted to drugs. And I remember one night going to, because they didn't detox pregnant women at that time. And I remember having her, and I had to go to the, in the nursery to feed her. Because she was born addicted, they wouldn't bring her and leave her in my room. And I'll never forget an experience. I know you're looking like, really? Right? Again, and I'll go into what we do today. But I remember going into that nursery, and I remember the nurse holding her. And it was the 1 a.m. feeding. And I stood there and I waited. I didn't have the nerve to say, lady, can you give me my baby? I came in here to feed her. And I remember a doctor came in and said to her, is that her baby? And she said, yeah. He said, well, give her her baby. Now, that didn't, at that time, like, that was a relief, because my low self-esteem and low self-worth wouldn't allow me to say that. Fast forward some years later, to go into My Life, My Choice, a friend of mine who's a survivor of the commercial sex industry asked me, she said, this new program, she said, I'm doing this training, we're training the Department of Children and Families on commercial sexual exploitation of children. Can you come in? Can you come and share your story? And I said, absolutely. So I went to their first training, shared my story. Then they asked me would I go and speak to young people, because they said we have this 10-week prevention curriculum in which we go into group homes, and we do this prevention group with girls who are in group homes. And could you go and tell the young people your story? And I said, absolutely. Now, mind you, I'm a mother of 3 girls. I really wasn't excited about working with girls because I didn't particularly like them, because I had 3 of them of my own, right? And so to kind of fast forward it, she stepped away from the work, and My Life, My Choice hired me. I began, I remember the day that I went to Boston Medical, and I trained their nurses and some of the doctors, and I remember going back to my other job, and I remember trying to track this doctor down. And I found him. How many people, I mean, you never call a doctor's office, a clinic, and you ask to speak to the doctor, and they pick up the phone. They said, hold on. He picked up the phone. And I told him who I was, and at that time I had been out of life over 10 years, and I shared with him how he had helped me, and I shared with him that I was in recovery, how this nurse treated me, and how he had helped me, and I explained the work that I was doing. He was on the other end of the phone crying. It was a couple of days before the Christmas, and he said, you know what? He said, you have given me the best gift that I've ever had, right? So prevention, and he didn't know that he was helping me, you know, at the time, but it meant a lot to me. And so what we do today at My Life, My Choice, we've trained a lot of the hospitals in the Boston area. So we train on commercial sexual exploitation of children, and we are pretty much the primary trainers in Massachusetts. As I said earlier, we have a 10-week prevention curriculum in which we go into group homes now, schools, really anywhere who houses or works with young adolescent girls, and introducing them, and we talk about the tactics that pimps use. We know, you know, we talk about social media and what they're doing on social media. But the most powerful tool that we have at My Life, My Choice, and again, to help with, help girls not be recruited into the life, again, we pair the women with adult women. I'm the first survivor in Massachusetts to mentor this population of young girls. And so we pair adult women survivors with girls for a one-on-one relationship, referrals. We take them under the age of 18, but when they turn 18, we don't say, you're 18, see you later. As long as they want to work with us, they still do. I have a mentee who'll be 30 in December. She still gets on my nerves. She's been bothering me since I've been here this week, right? But the bottom line is, because we have not, we do not give up on young people. And so the prevention is very important. I didn't have another woman in my life to say, this has happened to me, and how can I help or prevent this from happening to you again? So prevention is very important. The last thing I want to say is that anyone who works with young people can be trained on how to run our groups. Our groups are ran in 30 states across the country. We're looking forward to training other folks in other, you know, we like to have it in all of the U.S. Because the reach is for our young, vulnerable girls, and our goal is, with the prevention group, is to prevent young girls from being recruited into the commercial sex industry in all areas of their lives. And so with that, if people have questions, and I have cards, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.